Backrooms. What comes to mind when you hear that word? Maybe you remember those quarantine years with nostalgia when all of TikTok was flooded with liminal spaces. Or maybe to you it's all just some image that once floated around the internet, or even entire movie. Today we are going to uncover who the real father of the backrooms actually is. Why you should never cross a crossroad after midnight. Why something as simple as empty rooms scares us so much. And how a furniture store turned into a multi-million-dollar film production. To answer those questions, we need to go back to 2018 or even 2011. Around the time, a photo of a strange, empty room started spreading around the internet. Nobody really understood what the room was supposed to be. It just felt wrong. Later, an anonymous user on 4chan made a thread about paranormal images and asked people to post disquieting images that just fell off, using that exact photo. Then, another user replied with a short piece of a text that became the very first description of the backrooms. If you are not careful and clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you will end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum bus, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has hurt you. After the original creepypasta appeared, people started posting their own stories about the backrooms on subreddits like r creepypasta and later r backrooms. And that was the beginning of the huge, endless lore around the backrooms, endless like the backrooms themselves. Back in 2019, it felt very different from today. People were fully immersed in it. They wrote stories, created new floors and levels, and filled rooms with strange entities. But some fans preferred the original version of the backrooms. A Reddit user named Lidbeep created a separate subreddit r/through backrooms, dedicated only to the classic version, and that became the first big split in the online backrooms community. But things only got bigger from there. Once backrooms spread outside of Reddit and started blowing up on YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok, even more versions of the universe appeared. Big communities like Fandom and Wikidot started building their own lore, their own rules, and their own idea of what the backrooms actually were. Discord communities did the same thing, and that's when the real lore wars started. The problem was that was no real standardization. Backrooms became a kind of internet's folk legend when everyone created their own version of the story. Because of that, many sources completely contradicted each other. Some fans believed the backrooms should be completely empty and lonely, with no creatures at all, because the real horror came from isolation and infinite space. Others, meanwhile, created dozens of monsters and entire civilizations hidden inside the levels. In some versions, level 0 was safe. In others, it was deadly. Some people wrote that escape from the backrooms was impossible, while others created entire escape guides. Eventually, backrooms became much bigger than just a creepypasta. It turned into a huge, chaotic universe that every part of the fandom imagined differently. The biggest rise in backrooms popularity happened during quarantine in 2020. At the time, people were stuck at home, while huge places that were normally crowded, shopping malls, airports, schools, supermarkets, suddenly became completely empty, and that looked exactly like the backrooms. Places that once felt normal suddenly felt strange, unnatural, and unsettling. That's why the concept exploded in 2020. People were no longer seeing backrooms as just another internet horror story. They were seeing the same atmosphere in the real world around them. All of this continued until January 7th, 2022. That was the day a user named Kane Pixels uploaded this video on YouTube. And the day completely changed the game, because now, alongside the 4 already existing versions of the backrooms, a fifth one appeared. Completely new, completely different. And from my point of view, it's genuinely genius. At just 16 years old, using Blender and After Effects, Kane managed to create an entire universe. And this wasn't just another random horror fanfic. It felt like a carefully thought out story that connected the backrooms to the real world and its actual rules. At the center of everything is the Icing Research Institute. They discovered the backrooms and began trying to document them. The company presents its experiments as a solution to the housing crisis and lack of space. But little by little, it becomes clear that Icing Asyn's real goal is not helping people. They want to commercialize the discovery and gain control over a literally infinite space. Async constantly hides the truth about the dangers of the complex. People disappear, researchers die, hostile life forms begin to appear, but none of this stops the company. Instead, the management keeps preparing government presentations and thinking about how to monetize the backrooms in the future. And that's what makes the series so interesting. It's not just a typical monsters horror movie. It feels more like the real archive footage that somebody tried to hide from the public. Throughout the series, we watch Async study spatial distortions and experiment with machine capable of creating them. Kane uses scientific terminology, corporate presentations, laboratory tests. He ties the fictional story to real events and real places. The series even suggests that mass disappearances started only after Async opened the backrooms. That's what creates a conspiracy theory vibe. The feeling that somewhere out there are people or organizations who know more than everyone else, and they're hiding the truth. People naturally want to believe in things like that. A chaotic world becomes easier to understand when it feels like someone is secretly controlling it behind the scenes. For some people it's the Illuminati, reptilians, or government experience. For others it's religion or some kind of higher power. And the Backroom series plays with that feeling perfectly. The fear that outside our reality there might be something nobody will ever tell us about. And after the series became insanely popular, people started asking one big question: where did the OG Backrooms image actually came from? Some people thought it was just a 3D render. Then in 2024, a Discord community launched a huge search campaign to find the origin of the image. Eventually, the search led to a 2019 Twitter post from a user who shared the link to the original photo. But by then, the link was dead, so people had to use the Wayback Machine to open it. That's when they discovered an old 2003 blog post about the reconstruction of a radio-controlled racing track inside a stall called Hobbytown in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And that's when people realized the famous Backrooms image was actually just a crop photo of a real stall that exists in the real world. But did it kill the legend of the Backrooms? Of course not. You may ask yourself, okay, but what's actually scary about this? Because it almost sounds like introvert's paradise. You live alone, do whatever you want, no people, no problems, no conflicts, no bullying, no violence, no wars. Theoretically, in some versions of the Backrooms, there are even resources you need to survive. Vending machines, abandoned cafeterias, and even full safe zones with food supplies. Amount water is even considered healing there. It doesn't just quench thirst, it can increase stamina, improve strength, boost the immune system, sharpen focus, and even heal wounds. At the same time, there is also Acacia water, which is poisonous. But that's already deep lore territory I don't plan to dive into. Because the real question is why? Why those images make people feel uneasy? Why is the Backrooms concept one of the most effective types of horror? The first fear you face in the Backrooms is confusion itself. We live by the laws of physics. Science has spent centuries explaining how energy doesn't appear from nowhere and doesn't just disappear. We understand electromagnetism, atoms, and the fact that humans can't just walk through walls. Well, kind of, but not in this context. But when someone enters the Backrooms, all of that breaks instantly. Clip out of reality and end up in a place that physically shouldn't exist. And the question appears immediately: how? And there is no answer. And whether you can even escape is also unknown. But the very first fear is this: losing everything you knew before and having no idea if you will ever get it back. The second one is loneliness. For millions of years, humans survived by staying in groups. Families, tribes, cities, countries. Everyone had a role. Everyone depended on others. Modern humans aren't built to do everything alone, because we don't need to. Our entire system is built on efficiency, and our efficiency depends on the connection. In the Backrooms, you are completely alone, and that creates anxiety. Because you realize if something happened, nobody is coming to help you. The third reason is connected to how people choose safety. Even today, people tend to prefer apartments or hotel rooms with a good view and open visibility. In ancient times, humans chose caves on high places, so they could see everything around them while staying hidden. That helped with survival. That instinct is still inside us. We feel safe when we can see the space and control what's happening. But
But in a backrooms, you don't have that option. There's nowhere to hide. You can't even peek around the corners safely. The walls are long, flat, and repetitive, and every turn leads straight into another open space. Any attempt to look carefully immediately exposes you. There's no cover, no safety, no control.
The first reason is on top of that. 75% people with anxiety feel worse under fluorescent lighting.
And in the backrooms, fluorescent lights are basically the only source of light. There is no natural light at all. That breaks your sense of time completely. Morning, day, evening, night, all gone. Your circadian rhythm collapses, fatigue builds up fast, anxiety increases, emotional exhaustion grows, and there is no real recovery in that environment.
The fifth reason is more disturbing. The brain starts seeing monsters.
This is another evolutionary trait. When humans can clearly identify something, the brain tends to assume danger. It's safer to make a mistake and think there is a threat than to ignore it and get killed by a predator. This still works in the simpler versions of the backrooms, even the ones with no monsters at all.
The sixth reason is derealization.
In backrooms, reality stops feeling real. Endless rooms that shouldn't exist, staircases and corridors that lead nowhere, objects with no clear origin or explanation. Everything starts to feel like a dream you can't wake up from. A person begins to lose connection with reality and starts wondering, am I even real or just observing myself from the outside?
The seventh reason at that point that person truly become helpless.
Because from neuroscience perspective, helplessness is actually the brain's default state. Control is something we learn over time. In normal life, even in stress, we always have options. Run, fight, hide, escape, ask for help. In the backrooms, none of those options work, and the mind slowly breaks down into helplessness, where the only desire becomes escape, even death, just for the nightmare to end.
And finally, the eighth reason why backrooms is terrifying, because they twist the idea of being lost.
Normally, being lost means you're somewhere deep in nature, afraid you might never return to human civilization. The backrooms invert that. They throw you so deep into an artificial world that you start fearing you will never reach nature again.
By the way, about liminality, one of the first people to describe it was Victor Turner.
In his work, The Forest of Symbols, he describes liminality as a special in-between state. It happens between two stages of life. A person is no longer who they used to be, but not yet someone new. He builds on the ideas of Arnold van Gennep. Van Gennep describes three stages of transition: separation from the old life, the liminal phase, and return to society in a new status.
In simpler terms, liminality surrounds us all the time.
Sometimes it's just a short moment, for example, marriage, the transition from boyfriend and girlfriend to husband and wife. This brief moment can be seen as graduation night, the transition from students to graduates. Sometimes liminality is period. Teenagerhood is a good example, a transition between childhood and adulthood. For larger groups, university is also a liminal phase between school and work. Sometimes it can last a lifetime, like monastic life, or even an entire era, like Clone Wars.
Liminality is widely used in movies, animation, literature, TV series, and video games.
Most stories are built around transformation. At the start, the main character is one person. By the end, they are different. They go through challenges, losses, meetings, and crises that change their personality, values, and worldview. This transition phase, when the character is not who they were but not yet who they will become, is pure liminality.
The same applies to the idea good versus evil.
Evil is often defeated when it's in its most vulnerable transitional state. In moments of crisis, collapse, or identity breakdown, it is easier to destroy or change it.
In the essence, every story is a story of change, and the journey from being to becoming is liminality itself. At first, I wanted to list a specific movies or cartoons, but deeper you go, the more you understand that liminality is foundation of almost all storytelling. No matter the genre, Hollywood movie, anime, literature, or video games, almost all stories is about transition.
The only real exception might be the most radical forms of art house cinema, where narrative is intentionally removed. But even there, if you look closely, liminality often still appears, just in more abstract form.
The liminality we talk today is physical. It appears in liminal spaces.
They lead from point A to point B, but
they are neither the beginning nor the end. This can be corridors that connected rooms, stairwells that connected floors, roads and streets that connected places, bridges that connected two sides. Hotels and airports also count because they are temporary in between spaces. In Catholic teaching, purgatory is a temporary place where the soul is purified before entering heaven. It's not a final destination, it's a transitional zone. A person is no longer on earth, but not yet in heaven. In many cultures around the world, crossroads have been imbued with a special sense of sacredness and eeriness. Since ancient times, it has been believed that this is where evil spirits, demons, and otherworldly forces most often appear. It was at crossroads that witches performed their rituals, made pacts with dark forces, and cast curses. In Slavic mythology, there was even a persistent superstition. After midnight, one was not allowed to cross a crossroads in a center. It was believed that a traveler could pick up the evil brought there by a witch or encounter an evil spirit. Researchers Alexander Deal and Michael Lewis explained the unsettling nature of such places through the uncanny valley effect. Something that should feel alive suddenly feels empty and lifeless, which creates discomfort. Peter Heft, building on Mark Fisher's ideas, explains liminal horror in another way. It happens when reality does not match expectations. For example, we expect a school hallway to be full of students, but when it's empty, the same place becomes unsettling. Another layer comes from the visual style of the late 20th and early 21st century. Familiar childhood interiors, yellow linoleum, suspended ceiling tiles, cool fluorescent light. They create a strange feeling of nostalgia and unease at the same time. It feels like you've been there before, but something is slightly wrong. Over time, liminal aesthetics changed. People started focusing on spaces without human presence, like poolcore. Pools are not truly liminal on their own because they have a clear function. But when you remove people, they become eerie. Places that are usually full of life suddenly feel empty and otherworldly. These changes made liminal spaces even more popular among younger audiences. People subconsciously connect them with childhood memories. Photos of abandoned malls, playgrounds, roadside attractions, and empty houses become especially popular. They create a mix of nostalgia and sadness for the passing of time. Liminal spaces are also often linked to the aesthetics like traumacore, hauntology, and of course dreamcore. If you look deeper on its internet phenomenon, it might just seem like the random collection of images, photos or renders. Many people see backrooms nothing more than a fanfic created out of boredom by a group of people during the 2020 quarantine. But in reality, the history of backrooms and liminal spaces started much earlier, long before the internet culture took its modern form. Even before the digital era, this feeling could already be found in painting. For example, Edward Hopper was able to capture this sense of liminality in his work. He painted street scenes in the early mornings or late at night, when people are either not there yet or have already disappeared. Look at these paintings, you get this strange feeling. Familiar places, but completely empty of life. No people, no animals, no birds, just silence. Even in his later works, where people are present, Edward Hopper still creates a strong sense of loneliness. The characters feel lost inside empty spaces, because we emphasize with them that this emptiness begins to feel unsettling, like something unknown and frightening is hiding just outside the frame. A similar effect can be found in the works of John Register. His paintings show familiar urban and everyday scenes, but completely stripped of people. It feels like reality itself has been edited, like human presence was simply cut out, leaving behind a frozen space. This is exactly the kind of emptiness that defines the backrooms aesthetic. Expanding this idea in modern art, Hiroshi Nagai holds a special place. In his works, he often uses imagery from advertising magazines, travel brochures, and catalogs, depicting an idealized America of 17th and 18th. Despite the bright colors and visual optimism, these scenes remain empty. This gives them both a nostalgic and slightly unsettling liminal feeling. One of the most well-known installation artists of liminal spaces is Gregor Schneider. If internet culture created backrooms as myth and digital image set, Schneider built something similar in real life using bricks, drywall, and concrete. His works are a physical version of the backrooms. The theme of empty, isolated spaces is also very present in photography. For example, the Homes at Night series by photographer Todd Hido explores explores American suburban neighborhoods at night, where isolated houses become symbols of loneliness and quiet tension. In these images, familiar places feel like they exist outside of time. In cinema, the film The Langoliers, based on Stephen King's story, is one of the classic examples of liminal spaces. Its main symbol is the empty Bangor airport. This huge transit hub, stripped of people, sounds, and movement, becomes a perfect liminal space. The Shining is another film adaptation of Stephen King that explores liminality. When a building designed for hundreds of guests becomes empty, it turns into a closet trap that isolates people from reality and slowly drives them insane. This idea is continuous in modern cinema as well. The Backroom segment in anthology American Horror Stories adapts liminal aesthetics, presenting them as kind of psychological purgatory. The stories show the backrooms as a metaphor for the main character's repressed guilt, where he becomes trapped in a maze after refusing to accept his own crimes. The film Vivarium tells the story of a young couple who arrive in a suburban housing estate. There are hundreds of identical greenhouses. Everything is silent. They try to escape, but every road leads them back to house number 9. The town becomes a liminal trap because the suburban setting becomes terrifying because of its emptiness and artificial nature. Another artificial city appears in The Truman Show. It's an isolated, fully constructed space where the sun, rain, and stars are controlled by a director. There is no real life here, only an illusion of reality. This creates a deep feeling of unease and disconnection from the world. Even childhood animation sometimes contains similar elements. For example, in Augie and the Cucarachas, the city is made of identical houses and often empty streets. The house inside is much bigger than it looks from the outside, with endless empty rooms. This creates a strange mismatch with reality. And this list could go on forever, from the sterile maze-like office corridors of Lumen in Severance to the endless red-curtained rooms in Twin Peaks, the looping backstage spaces of Inland Empire, the eerily empty suburban nights and abandoned locations in I Saw the TV Glow, the claustrophobic industrial halls in Eraserhead, the endless underground tunnels of shadows in Us, and the naturally bright artificial escapes and warehouses in Toys. Liminality was one of the visual markers of 90s and 2000s video games. Back then, the gaming industry was very different. Computers and consoles had weak hardware, so developers constantly had to make compromises. To make games run properly, they simplified textures, reduced NPCs, lowered detail, and left large empty spaces. But these limitations accidentally created the atmosphere that today many people associated with liminality and backrooms. One of the first games where this feeling became especially strong was Silent Hill. Here, technical limitations are hidden behind thick fog. Because of that, the abandoned streets feel even more lonely and eerie. Later, a similar atmosphere appeared in Portal. Sterile laboratories and the complete absence of people created the feeling that you are trapped inside a cold, artificial facility that does not care about your presence at all. In Garry's Mod, this feeling becomes even stronger. On empty maps, the player is often left alone in strange, unnaturally quiet spaces. In Portal 2, the scale becomes even larger, and the more realistic the place looks, the more its cold emptiness is felt. A similar feeling appears in the Stanley Parable. The entire game takes place in an empty office with identical corridors, soft lighting, and a sterile corporate atmosphere. After backrooms became popular, more and more games started being built specifically around this aesthetic. And this game, the main character is often the space itself. The player is placed in total isolation, no people, no familiar enemies, and no clear direction. Games like Superliminal, Pools, Anemoiopolis, Subliminal, and Just More Doors fall into this category. In the Exitate, the player is stuck in a normal Japanese subway passage that suddenly becomes endless. The game forces you to carefully observe your surroundings, looking for small anomalies. And My House was. At first, it looks like a normal, cozy house, but gradually the space starts to shift. Rooms change, corridors stretch, and the house turns into a strange labyrinth where it becomes hard to tell what is real and what is not. And of course, Roblox. As scary as it may sound, in today's world, every super popular scene seems to share the same fate. Kids, and memes. And nothing kills the sense of mystery and liminality of the backrooms faster than another skibidi toilet scene in the backrooms. And at some point, that's exactly what happens. Backrooms become too popular, and that's what ruined them. Every popular character was shown into it, and kids content creators only amplified the topic, trying to form insane views. And they did get them. And just like that, something that felt cool, deep, and maybe even one of the scariest horror concepts ever turned into cringe. Right now, for many people, backrooms associated with that kind of childish content. But I hope that will change in this summer and its fascinating universe will get a new breath of air. Because on May 29, the film Backrooms by A24 Studio is coming out, a thriller that has already resonated with millions of people. The director of the film is none other than Kane Pixels, who in 2022 created his own Backrooms universe on YouTube. So expectations are really high. Because no matter what, Backrooms evoked a pleasant sense of nostalgia in all of us, and his story deserves to be adapted for the screen and given a quality sequel. Like this video if you like it, subscribe to my channel, and I see you next time. Bye bye.